In this lesson, we'll add some grips and just finish out the handlebars. So we've got the main shape of the handlebars built. Let's say we want to add some grips along this. So let's think about this. How would we do this? Well, we could use primitives and bring in some cylinders, and we try to add a new cylinder to each spot here and then add a bunch of cylinders, but I think that's probably going to be pretty time consuming and pretty tedious. So what we can do is actually, again, use this piece as a basis for additional pieces. So sort of like we use some of these other pieces down here as a base, we extracted some faces from those and then use those to build some other pieces that kind of fit. I think it makes sense for us to do the same sort of thing here. And so let's go ahead, and I want to be able to cut parts of this apart and add detail really quickly. So I'm going to actually turn this into a polygon. So we'll go ahead and go NURBS to polygons. And let's go ahead and choose, make sure we choose quads. Instead of control points, let's just choose standard fit and tessellate that into kind of an even mesh. Now you can see that we've created the polygon version of this. The NURBS version is still there. So if I turn off polygons, that NURBS is still there. I've turned off some NURBS. Now we see our polygon shape. You see we have our nice even lines here. So what I want to do is go ahead and go to face selection, and I want to just go through, and I'm going to click and then shift double click through here. Okay, and that will go ahead and select these rows here. Okay, these edge loops, or face loops rather. All right. I want to make sure that you get the ones right next to one another. And we'll do this all the way down to the end. All right, and down here, all the way down to the end. Now, if this is what we want to be our actual grip, then we need to drag across and actually hold down shift and drag across, and it'll invert the selection, because what we want to have selected is sort of the inverse of where we want our grips to be, because we're going to be deleting those. Okay, so if you want your grips to be in the unselected portions, then this is fine. Otherwise, shift drag across to invert the selection, and you can also go in here and invert selection as well under edit. So once we have those selected, I think want to come in, and I don't want them to be solid rings around here, and so I'm going to go ahead and double click that row as well. Okay, so looking at this, only the gray parts are going to be the grip, so we're going to have a little bit of a gap here. Okay, if you want to add that, that's fine. Otherwise, you can just leave the rings. And so I'll go ahead and just delete. And so now we're left with these pieces of geometry. Now these are kind of lined up with the surface right now. We want to add some thickness to these. So let's go ahead and just do an extrude. Without selecting anything, it'll extrude everything. Okay, and we don't want to change our pivot. And so let's just grab our Z manipulator here and just pull those out. So give them a little bit of thickness there. Not thickness in. We don't want to push them in. We want them to pull them out so that they'll be on the outside of our existing handlebars. Okay, if we turn on NURBS again, you can see there we've got now our grips sitting outside of those handlebars. Now I don't want them to be that big and bulky, so I'm going to just hit 3, and that creates something that's a little bit more like our bike handle. I also want to add a cap onto the end, and this is something where we could use a primitive. Let's go ahead and just use a cylinder. So we'll drop a cylinder in. Let's kind of put it up into position here. We'll move it over. We want to rotate it. And let's rotate it 90 degrees in the X. Okay. We can go ahead and scale it down a bit. And we don't want all of that resolution in there, most likely. So we'll take our subdivisions in the axis down to 8. Usually when we are working with cylinders and spheres that we're going to be smoothing, 8 is a good number for getting a smooth result. You can go lower, but sometimes you won't get the smoothness that you want. So here, let's go ahead and scale this down even more. And we just want to create a little cap right there on the end. So we'll kind of get it centered on that. Okay, now the angle's off a little bit, so we'll go ahead and rotate it. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and add a couple of subdivisions in the cap. I'm just clicking in this and middle dragging. I want to change these values here. Let's add a couple of subdivisions on the cap. Okay. I'm going to select the faces in the middle. Okay. And then Shift period, which is kind of the greater than, and that will grow the selection. Let's pull this out. I want it to be a little bit more rounded. Let's shrink the selection. Shift, comma, and then let's scale this out. Okay, so what we've done here is we've created a curve here, thinking about the fact that we're going to smooth this. We've created a curve here, and then a little bit of a sharpness up here because we've added these, we've put these lines very close to each other. Okay, so as you practice with working with polygons that you know you're going to smooth, you'll be able to kind of see what they're going to look like. Now this is still going to be very soft back here, so we'll definitely need to sharpen that up. Now I want to go in and extrude this part, extrude again, and again, and again. All right. Now remember, we can turn that into quads just by selecting those points or those lines there and deleting those. And now we'll get our insert edge loop tool and drop that in there. Okay, let's put one right in the middle as well. Now let's say that I want to add kind of a dip in here. So I want to add an edge loop on either side of this particular edge loop. Okay, now I could insert an edge loop on either side, or I can double click that edge loop to get the entire loop, and then go to offset edge loop tool instead of insert edge loop tool. That will allow me to click and drag, and I can drag out 2 loops simultaneously on either side of the selected loop. So I just did in one action what I would have done with 2 using the insert edge loop tool, and then we can kind of decrease the size of that, and we get something like that if we smooth it out using the 3 key. Now let's take our pieces, got all 3 of these pieces. Let's hit Control G to group them together and call them bar 1 or something meaningful. And we know that the pivot, so we created a new group, is at the origin. So now we can duplicate it, pop it over to the other side. Let's freeze our transforms, and one of these is going to be off. It's this one, so we'll go ahead and reverse our normals on the one that's black. And under surfaces, we will reverse the surface direction. And we want to delete our history on that first. And then we'll go in and reverse our surface direction. And there we've got, we'll do one more, and we've got our handlebars. All right, complete with our grips and little caps on the end. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is to go ahead and start working on kind of the sprocket where the pedals are going to be down here. We'll do kind of a hubless thing just like we did with the wheel, just to make it kind of interesting. So we'll go ahead and look at the revolve tool in order to get this shape down here, and then look at beveling. So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.